Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what time zone you're in. Welcome to our Wednesday webinars with Presentation Excellence. Today's topic is Cultivate Leaders Effective at 21st Century Decision Making. We're all realizing that some of the classic issues that leaders face and some of the newest issues in the 21st century that are being faced by people require a higher level and focus of decision making, and today's broadcast will focus on some of those issues. So I want to welcome you to come. You've all been muted, but if you'll notice on the screen there in your left-hand column, there's a place to type messages. You can write your messages as we proceed, and we'll try to respond to them as we move on. But we'll take all your questions at the end. Also at the end, I will give you my email contact information as well as a phone number. And I usually use the webinars as a way of beginning a conversation, in many cases creating relationships that last years. And so feel free to ask additional questions and ask for insights as we move forward, not just today, but in the future. And with that, let me begin. I also want to remind you with one more thing I forgot. Today is the third of 5 webinars. Next week is on innovation and leadership, and the following week on student mentor opportunities and how we can use them to help the next generation find jobs, and how we can increase our productivity. From that, you might want to do that. Okay, so let's begin. You'll hear me. I'm going to have my mic on at maximum volume, and it should be working. So let me go over the agenda. In a good presentation, you always tell people where you're going, then go, and then sum it up, and that's what we'll do today. Focus on some of the leadership challenges that people are experiencing. Many of you know that I've been working with leaders for several decades now. I'm a Vistage chair. Vistage is a leading chief executive organization with 16 members, most of whom are running companies from $5 million to $2 billion. So it's an opportunity for me to listen to them and the troops on the ground are saying are some of the biggest issues they're running into, and so we'll share them. And then I'm going to go through what I call the 5 attributes of effective leadership, because these are the things over time I believe really make the difference. First is clarity of purpose. The second is communication excellence, and we'll spend time on each one. The third is a commitment to a leadership theme. Each leader in a long-term company has a different theme, and how you focus in on that is, I think, very, very important. The fourth is courage, the courage of convictions, making the tough calls, and ability, and that's really relating to we set it up for our next generation leaders. And so that's our roadmap, and with that, let's begin. So I like to start with definitions. Many of you know I also teach. I teach at CUNY. So I always start with definitions so we're all on kind of the same page. What's leadership? It's a process by which you influence group members toward achievement of its goals, where the members view the influence as legitimate. What makes this a really important definition is that it applies to 2 key issues. One is the nature of getting other people to follow you is through influence. Robert Cialdini is currently one of the major people focusing on it. I'm a sociologist, and I've been studying all the things that affect influence for many, many years. I studied under Stan Milgram, for those of you who are familiar with this on obedience experiment. But the key here is that what we're trying to do is get people to buy into the ideas we as leaders are promoting, and therefore follow through on them. And so it's the influence approach is one in which we're buying, as we'll see in a few minutes, into every part of a human being, the head, the heart, and even the guts. The second part that influence is legitimate, as opposed to, as we've gone through the Holocaust and we've gone through other crimes throughout society, illegitimate efforts to influence people, putting people in prison and things like that. So we're looking at the kind of things you would do in an organization where you're trying to get them to do what you want to do, as well as in terms of volunteer groups and peer groups that we might be working with. Second definition that I want to focus in on is the difference between a leader and a manager. Peter Drucker is famous for this, and I think it's a really good one to really, the top of every organization is a leader. Doing is choosing the direction for the things that people should do. In a sense, we call that creating the vision, where the company should end up and what kind of world it's going to create, and the mission, which is what everyone gets up every morning to do, to be able to excite them of what they're going to do for themselves and for their customers, and also to set the values and the culture of the company. A company's culture is an absolutely critical element. It's the values, the norms, the behaviors, the implicit beliefs that run a company. Peter Drucker also is famous for recognizing, as he calls it, culture eats strategy for breakfast. In other words, you can set up an effective strategy, but if people aren't willing to go along because the culture is one that's resisting, it won't go anywhere. To use an analogy of this stuff, the mission for Microsoft in the early create software that people could use to increase their productivity and create a platform on which additional software could be used, hence Windows and all of its software. The vision was a world where people were productive and as Bill Gates called it, a computer on everyone's desk. The values were one of excellence in producing the software and keeping it up to date. The culture is one in which people focused on being aligned to produce effectively the software and to make money with the company. Today, Steve Ballmer faces an area where the world has changed and he has those issues, and it's one of the reasons he's probably stepping down and moving in. And so every company has these four elements. We should be looking at what they are, but they're coming from the leaders. The people in charge of getting things done right are the managers. People right under them, they may be leaders also in their right. Leaders on their sense may be a manager, but it's a different role. It's a different hat. They're focusing on how do I implement, how do I execute. In many ways, they're the people who are implementing the strategy. They're making sure that the culture stays constant and produces the kind of goodwill among people, alignment, focus that people want. But we're focusing today much more on the leadership side of that, where companies want to go, and so that's going to be our approach. Now, one of the things to understand is that leadership is everywhere. We all lead at different levels. And so in many ways what we're leading is leading upwards. We manage in some ways, we lead our direct reports for sure who we are managing, but also the people who are, sometimes we have to lead them, encouraging them to have courage of their convictions, for example, and what they want to do. And we're also going to lead people to the left and to the right, our peers that we work with. And that's why influence is such a great word, because we're influencing these people in many ways. None of us is 100% sure of everything we do at all times. And so we have open thought that's critical in making great decisions. And so leaders in an organization, and what we need to do as the top leaders of our company, and usually when people come to my presentations, that's the kind of role they're playing, is recognize we have leaders within the company at lower levels. We need to identify those who have those traits and cultivate them as fast as we can so we can promote them to take larger positions in the company. There are many Vistage groups that I work, or Vistage companies rather, than I work with, have their own system of what I call fast tracking, identifying people within the organization at all levels and then putting them on a fast track to promote them so they can move up the ladder a little bit faster than their peers because they have that capability. But we should all be aware that at all times we can be in a role where we make a leadership difference to the company. The issue for each of us is, why should I follow someone who wants to be a leader? Because that person may not be producing the kind of climate, demonstrating the kind of attributes that we're going to discuss today. So in other words, if I need clarity of purpose to get people to want to follow me, I'm more likely to follow you if I understand what your purpose is. It's not just what I do, as Simon Sinek says, it's why I do it. It's understanding the whys behind what we do. And so that's where leadership has to play its critical role. Leadership requires a commitment to being authentic. It's a very, very important part. For those of you who attended 2 weeks ago, the ADAP presentation on presentations, I refer to audience-driven, authentic presentations. Because in many ways, the presenter is always a leader of where the audience should be going, and therefore being authentic is critical there. It's critical in organization. If you have someone who's a hypocrite, who's not walking the talk, then people understand that and they really won't respect that person as a leader. And so we're looking at it as a well-rounded person, and these are some examples, Bill Gates, Richard Branson, Warren Buffett, as people in their area and well-recognized. They've got the head, they're planning the direction, they're constantly communicating it. Communication, as we hear very, very often, and for leaders, they say communicate, 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 over-communicate. There's no such thing as over-communicate. It's communicating to the point that someone gets a message and then feels reinforced to continue doing the message. That's what leadership's about. So it's planning the direction and communicating it so the troops really understand what to do and how to do it. As you're probably all aware, when Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway puts together his annual report, his letter is something that's a work of art for most people as he lays out his ideas of where it's going. The second part, which keeps leaders doing what they're doing, is their heart. Many people believe the critical role for a great leader of oneself, as well as an organization, is passion. Okay? It's the ability to show that you have energy for what you want to do and commit what you're doing. Well, that heart, that passion, that willingness to go to undiscovered ground and unnavigated territory is what teams need to see if they're going to be mobilized, and that's our goal. So when you're trying to climb, as the picture we had before is climb these large mountains, Mount Everest, etc., and mobilize teams to do that, or mobilize a team to send a man to the moon, as John F. Kennedy tried to inspire people to do in 1961, to send a man to the moon at the end of the decade safely and bring him back safely. That became a passion that everyone at NASA understood and took care of and followed through on, and we accomplished it by 1969 within even less than the decade that was set up. So the heart has to be in it. And finally, you have to demonstrate your courage and the integrity of what you're doing. It's the guts that are going to really make the difference when you do it. Authenticity is really showing all parts of yourself, all parts of what it takes to be a leader, because those are the critical components. And if you try to just focus on one or two, you're going to have an imbalance, and inevitably it's going to create a problem with those people who ask the question, why should I follow you? So it's a commitment to being authentic in who you are and demonstrating all facets of yourself. I often like to think of leaders who are really important to understand that they are diamonds, multifaceted, and they need to show so many different facets to different parts of the audience to get them to follow them where they're going. But overall, it's that diamondness that makes the difference. I'm trying to go to the next slide. Let's see. I apologize. There we go. So with understanding what leaders are, that takes us to the next question, which is, what are some of the issues that we need to really look at? Well, today's global challenges are really challenging. The interesting part is the key parts of leadership, they haven't changed over the years. They really are the same. It's mobilizing people, showing your passion, taking them where you go. If you notice the 5 attributes, as we go through them in a few minutes, are common to all of life. But as the world changes, as we become a flat world where communications instant from New York to Beijing, where we have a workforce that's working in 40, 50 different places, where companies' R&D isn't a laboratory at Pfizer, but it's really a crowdsourcing process around the globe, what we're discovering is that that kind of world challenge means we have to do everything we do better. We have to do it faster. We have to do it more succinctly with greater precision. So the world is flat, is changing. The time span for the leaders. There's less error, less time and space for error. We need to get it right the first time because we're going to be doing it. The economic stagnations that we run through become greater frustrations, and therefore the leaders have to be able to demonstrate their ability to take us on a longer-term panel than we've ever been before. If you take a look at the dysfunctional leadership we're seeing today in Washington, D.C., today is probably not just today in general, but today as a date, where we don't have a budget, where we're trying to avoid a credit crunch, where we can't get the House and the Senate to pass legislation that's absolutely critical to the future of this country. We're seeing how this can distract people, force people to make decisions that are temporary maybe, but untimely in terms of where they're going. Today's article in the Wall Street Journal was selling billions and billions of bonds people are doing because they're nervous. Yet most people in the stock market think it'll be resolved. We're running to the stagflations because we haven't communicated as leaders a clear vision of going low of where we're going, and that's creating a real problem. The security issues are critical. We're dealing with all kinds of new threats in terms of pollution, in terms of warfare, Syria now chemicals, Iran potential nuclear. We need to deal with these issues, and leaders are the key to showing that we know how to handle it, etc. Again, all the skills of a leader need to be able to address it. Unfortunately, our current president has believed that leading from behind is a good way. Doesn't work. Leaders have to be upfront. It means when you say your head, your heart, and you're out front, and you're showing the truth, and that's why they follow you. You have to be ahead. There are global power shifts. Most poignant was we ended in the 1990s what was thought of as the way of the world in my generation, changed to a superpower, not two superpowers, who had the opportunity to take over and make the world free, but we didn't take a leadership role, and so now we have regional conflicts that are growing everywhere. China's becoming a new shifted power. Many of us who believe China will be the leading country within the next couple of decades, and it is moving in that way in many different directions right now. So leadership becomes important. Things which were not problems before are becoming leaders. We have demographic changes that's unheard of in the history of our world, where we have 4 to 5 generations of workers in the same workplace, each of whom responds to different incentives, different modes for working, each of whom relates different ways to some of the different benefits that companies can offer with different plans. The whole concept of working has changed. People are more often now independent contractors, and they're working from home or in virtual places. It's just small companies they're working. The diversity that's out there means communication is challenged. The waves, the common definitions that companies might have had by reinforcing the words over and over again can't be reinforced when people aren't in the same place and are only getting together on town hall meetings once a quarter and are receiving most of their information through memos or brief conference calls like on WebEx technology or something like that. The challenge of getting everyone to be aligned, to understand the value of a strategy to move a country forward, short-term, intermediate, and long-term, and to align all of them is more critical than ever before. And so leaders need to be able to do this if they're going to move us forward. And that becomes a major challenge. It's really this mastery now of virtual versus global and global workforces is probably for most corporations one of the biggest challenges. How do you deal with 26 plants on 6 continents with different kinds of workforces who need instant communications of what's happening and where to go and what to do? This morning I teach, as I mentioned, we're talking about a company called Tata Motors in India that 2.5 years ago, while I was teaching, introduced something brand new called the Nano, a car for $2,500 designed to help the poor masses move from motorcycles, which were very unsafe for 3-4 people, to cars. And now it's discovered that it's failed to be able to meet that need because it didn't anticipate enough of the need. It didn't realize when people are going to buy a better technology, a car, it has to be something that they pride in, not just something that they rattle in. So the estimation of 15,000 cars per month that they would sell has become 2,500. Companies bleeding, its technology, upgrading. Is it doing it fast enough? Is it recognizing all the needs? These are the kinds of questions that need to be answered. Third is the innovator's dilemma. You've probably heard of that from Clayton Christensen over at Harvard University, who focuses on if innovation is such a critical part of what we do. It's one of the reasons we'll talk about it in next week's webinar. Do you wait for the world to change and then adapt to it, or do you lead the change? That's really the dilemma that the innovator has to focus on. Is he going to put himself out of business, especially if it's disruptive technologies, or is he going to wait for it to happen? Think of the computer industry as a great example. It starts with 8-inch disks in floppy drives and moves to 5.5, 5.25, moves to 3.5, moves to CDs, moves to DVDs, moves to thumb drives. Every different technology is there requiring, holding more memory and requiring computers with different hardware capabilities and clearly different processing. Moore's law, that the computer computer processing speed will double every 18 months. Do you therefore put yourself out of business, which is the real dilemma, and struggle through maintaining multiple product lines? Or do you keep going as long as you can and milk it and wait for someone else to do it and hopefully figure out how to stay in line? Intel faced that issue and realized its solution in the dilemma is to be a leader that does put current technologies out of business and use it in different cases as it downgrades each chip to a different application and moves itself forward with everything. It is a dilemma that every leader has to look at. I myself was in an industry and recognized the technology was going to put us out of business, and that made a decision to be the last man standing, and we were going to do that, and we became the last man standing in that industry, kind of like a buggy whip company might be the one that's last providing it for the people with Central Park or the Amish, but no, also to create a whole new business so that people still have jobs. And finally, which is again why this is such an important issue to me personally and the leaders that I work with, how do you unleash creativity and harness innovation? It's that issue of how to unleash creativity, which is every couple of years when when IBM does its biennial studies, the number one issue. How do we become more innovative? How we put it together? But what's interesting is in the study most recently done by IBM of its 1,500 plus leaders around the globe, innovation was still a leading issue, number two. But the number one issue was this recognition that the world is volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's changing. And in this world that's constantly changing, they need to make changes that aren't incremental anymore. It won't meet the needs. Over 50% said they are not yet prepared to handle the new world of complexity. It's that much more difficult. And that's one of the reasons cultivating next gen to be able to think through the questions of what do I do as a leader and how do I do it is so critical, and to develop the new kinds of tools to be able to handle complexity. I teach organizational theory as part of my course, and I introduce what some people consider a controversial issue, but it makes the point nicely. If you build an organizational chart, traditional charts have been functional or focusing on small business units. In the 1960s, because of NASA's requirement for creating a new kind of organization, it created the matrix organization used by many of the Fortune 500 companies right now, focusing on both product and function as a major organizational structure. Just before I started today's Vistage, members asked me, do I know anything about a circular structure? And I'm doing some research on it right now. But I think one of the greatest structures really to think about is the network structure. And it's the one that unfortunately we've all been exposed to, but don't see it as an organizational structure, but rather as an enemy. It's what Al-Qaeda has done. It's figured out how to network people, provide leadership, and get the people mobilized, not only that they'll carry out tasks and responsibilities, but that they'll feel leaders for their own projects to the point that they're willing to actually give up their lives. Think of that dedication. You can contrast that to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s assembly line worker who's not motivated to put everything on the line. That's a completely new structure, the network structure, and how we use that is a function of us understanding the leadership and the complexity of the world right now, and how we communicate and how we get people to come back to what are the critical issues to deal with. And that's the reason I put together this program, because when I work with leaders, these are the issues that are constantly coming up. So let's focus on those 5 attributes that I think are absolutely critical for effective leadership, so that we really understand them, and maybe you can spend more time working with your leaders, getting help on working with them. The first one's clarity of purpose. All great leaders have really defined where the company is going and what they're doing. And that goes to the issues I discussed earlier before. What's the vision, okay? How is this company going to change the world? Think about Starbucks. In a world that people were used to coffee as something that you made at home or you made in the office, suddenly promoting it as a retail product and not just a consumption, but an experience, totally changing it. And so their vision is a world of people who are experiencing great coffee and even having a third place in their life where they could go ahead and enjoy it. And so they were going to move forward. And then a mission. How do I motivate all my people to want to go forward and work on it? Well, the way I impact on my customers was to motivate all the people who work, the baristas at Starbucks, to get up early in the morning or late in the afternoon, depending on the hour shift that they're on, and go to the company and know they're going to make absolutely the best coffee and make sure that the experience they have, whether they drink the coffee in the store or taking it home, is always one of excellence. Okay, that's each's mission, the sense of satisfaction in what they do. The values, what do we stand for? Think about the value of Starbucks in terms of not only the coffee and the ability to make change people's lives, but its own workforce. Every worker who works 30 or more hours gets health care. Treating people with greater respect and dignity and not just being gremlins working in a fast food type outfit at minimum wage is part of the values. What do we stand for? We stand for quality of life. And the goals, what do we have to accomplish now? Because it's changing all the time. How does Starbucks adapt to a world of Dunkin' Donuts offering a quality coffee and Pete's offering coffee and so many other companies, and a world where people are moving to other drinks? So now, as you know, Starbucks is offering a juice opportunity and introducing. What do we adapt to the needs of our people? Because remember, the vision was a world of people who are enjoying life through coffee and the experience, and now it's just part of it, so they have to fill in the needs of people. So customer responsiveness changes for both the vision and the mission, as long as the value is to provide an excellent experience for everybody trying to do. Sorry, the text suddenly disappeared on this one, so let me share it with you. The key here is to stay. And what does that mean? Focus means saying no. This is Steve Jobs' words. Focus means saying no to the 100 of the good ideas that there are. You have to pick carefully. Steve Jobs said, I'm as proud of things we haven't done as the things we have done. And that's a guideline that I give people all the time, because I think it's a really important issue to focus in on, is that he was proud of creating all the wonderful design, but each time he did it, he said no to other products and services, and he understood that doing that made a bigger difference because it left him time to work on it. So many leaders find them chasing many different directions as opposed to staying focused on the 1 or 2 things that's important. Once they've decided what's important, the second issue is communication. That's how you influence people, by communicating it to them. So one of the things is the ABCs is always be communicating. Recognize we do that in many different ways. We communicate through content, what we say, through style, the way in which we say it. So many times our body language may belie what we really mean to say. Think about, we write full sentences when we write papers, we write small brief notes when we're writing maybe an email, in buzzwords, and then we use Twitter, where we're using quick abbreviations and smilicons to be able to get messages across. So we need to look at all the different ways a person, a company communicates to all the people that it's working on. Picture here showing trust, okay? So there's communication that he's willing to take the risk of falling and hoping that they'll catch him. Always remember, though, when you're communicating, to be consistent, because actions speak louder than words. And if you think of the analogy of one step forward and some steps back, when you're inconsistent, it's one step forward and 10 steps back. It's hard to do it. It takes a long time sometimes, as Warren Buffett once said, to create a great reputation, but it only takes a few minutes to destroy it. So you want to always be communicating to people so they understand it. The rationale in communication is connection, because that's what we are. And so what you need to do is try to understand not just how you connect, but how other people connect, and connect in a way they do. For those of you who are familiar with neuro-linguistic programming, NPL, that's really the approach on it, to try to understand how do other people process information. I do this very often with teams, and I try to say, let's identify how you do it, because people are often making mistakes. There are people who think, oh, I love using email, so if I have to tell you something, I'm always going to use email. Except if it's urgent, email is probably not the best way to communicate. You might want to grab the phone, or just go next door, tell the person next door what's happening. So you need to do it. Former President Ford made a point. Nothing's was more important than the ability to communicate effectively. And I think he learned that well, and I think his inability to get his own term afterwards is because he wasn't communicating as well as he needed to, what his vision for the future of the country was, and that's why Jimmy Carter beat him in that election. You want to master the influence strategies that are there. And you have to understand, we influence people, I said it before, the heart, the mind, and the guts. Well, essentially we're using logic for the mind, emotions for the heart, and the gut is power. Now, some of us have more power and less power, and you can use gut power to get things done, but the reality of the situation is, in most cases, we want to encourage people to make the decisions consistent with what our mission and vision is on their own, and the way we do that is by appealing to their emotional reasons for acting and the logic. Judge Jerome Frank in 1935 made a comment about what's more important. He said, I make decisions very often based on my gut. It's the emotional reason I do what I do, and then I rationalize it through the law. And I think he was capturing the reality of a lot that people do. What they're doing is they may couch it in the emotion, but what we really do is in the logic, but we really do it for the emotion. In fact, Kahneman and Tversky and his people over at the University of Pennsylvania in 1996 won the Nobel Prize for Behavioral Economics. These were psychologists focusing on why people make economic decisions, and they discovered that given avoiding a loss, gaining a gain, people would rather avoid the loss. It's an emotional thing over the logical thing, and that's how they're going to make decisions. So there are many strategies that people can use, and for those of you who've learned negotiations, you've learned some of these. I refer to them both in the negotiation work that I do as well as in the influence thing, is reciprocity. You should give before you receive. That's a great way to get things if you're in a network situation. What you want to do is give people a reason to avoid risk. You do that by reversing the risk. Think about the 30-day money-back guarantee. There's no problem because you've lost nothing. We've taken the entire risk. You want to use social proof. You want to show that there's other reasons besides me to believe it. So you provide, if you're a company, third-party credibility by focusing on all the different customers who've used you and have had successful reasoning. And always remember, when you're trying to influence people, again, risk aversion beats gain attainment. The third part that you want to consider is the leadership theme. And this, I think, is a very, very important part that most people, when they're looking at their company, haven't really started. If you know the purpose, which we say clear it, understand it's going to generate a theme you want to follow through on. So let's take organizations, because you can see over time how they change. On the left, we have two pictures. We have Jack Welch, who is the CEO, as you all know, of General Electric. In the 1990s, he took that company and he catapulted it to be, for a while, the most valuable in the world, and he did that by making a tough set of decisions. He was going to be only in those businesses where he could be a leader, number one and two. If he couldn't be number one and two in those industries, he was going to get rid of it. And he sold off lots of people. And he spent an enormous amount of time and money in Crotonville to be able to create leaders by cultivating their leadership and bringing in ideas to do it. His goal was to open up new territory where they could move and sell what they're going to do by focusing on those areas in which they could provide great value, leadership role 1 and 2 for their customers. When he retired, because of his success with leadership training, he had 6 people, all of whom were qualified to take over his company. And all of them actually, when they didn't get it, Jeff Immelt got the position, left for other companies, whether it's Boeing or Ford or Home Depot. They became leaders of their rights in these great companies. Jeff Immelt, though, if you think about it, his leadership theme was different. He wasn't about, let's unload those businesses, get rid of those things that distract us. His approach was to say, how do I move my company forward in those areas that I'm in? How do I stay number one? How do I develop a greater competitive advantage? How do we work in a complex world where people are copying what we do, imitating what we do, and to emerge in that world? So he's had a much tighter fight since the year 2000, which is the last decade. Take a look at this stock and you don't see the kind of rise we saw in the 1990s because it's a different challenge he's had and maybe he's been less successful. Or IBM. When Tom Watson first introduced IBM, he was creating a new company and a new paradigm of where that company is, becoming a leader in computers. He took that company to great lengths, but by the 1990s, the company was falling apart in the sense that it didn't have a sense of where it was going. It didn't know what to do. It was finding that it could sell computers, but so could others, and its margins were decreasing. So it brought in somebody from a completely different area. And when Gerstner took over the job, and his book's written very nice, it tells the story very nicely in a book called Dancing with Elephants, he made his decision, we're not in the hardware business, we're not in the computing business, we're in the business of solutions, and we use computers as powers to be able to do it. And if you look at any of the beautiful ads they do nowadays on municipal, on energy, on all the different areas that they're providing expertise, Watson offering new technology that could be used in healthcare, you see the legacy that he's left. It's a different theme. It's computing solutions to solve everyday problems. And so over time, they change. And what's really critical as we pass the baton to the next generation is to recognize we're going to have to do that same thing. We're going to have to focus people on where it goes. And so the themes change over time. These are some of the common themes. Innovation. Lastly, came in when he took over, P&G. 20% of all of the innovations in the company in R&D were actually turning into new products, 20%. He found that was one of the biggest problems, so he changed the model. Instead of only doing R&D in the company, he became a company that's created partnerships with other companies, other researchers around the world to be able to do it. And he increased the value of the company, among other reasons, because now 50% of all the projects they worked on became products. Becoming more customer-centric, a very important part. Globalization, how do we sell in a global economy? How do we make decisions to do this? Think of the Walmart challenge. Walmart's number one in America, but consistently when it makes its first entree in Mexico, in Japan, in China, in India, just this week an article about it. It's failed to. It has the logistics, but it doesn't have a consumer responsiveness it needs. And it's learning it has to partner with other people. Great service is a critical part. Customer-centric at Zappos, it owns customer service. Whereas you have Walmart owning low cost when it comes to retail, but Amazon doing a better job on the e-commerce area. Each of these companies that you see there has handled some of these issues in a different way. Holding people accountable for growth has become the commonality for all of them because it has to feed into the theme. It's the reason I introduced you last week to ETW, because it's a great tool for accountability. The fourth issue is courage of your convictions. Ultimately, a lot of what we've talked about is really thinking. It's the head part of what we do. but the courage of your convictions is what really makes a difference. It means being willing to face danger with confidence, self-possession, and resolution. This is Kenny Chenault, who's American Express's CEO, says you can't manage by a manual. You got to manage by values and beliefs, and it's the kind of culture he's created in his company, so people are going to take the tough decisions and move it. And I bring you back again to Steve Jobs, who's done such an excellent job of trying to teach us through his entire life some of what he's done. And as toward the end of his life, he made this comment: your time is limited, so don't waste it by living someone else's life. Follow your heart, follow your intuition, follow your courage. He believes that the intuition already knows something that you need to know, and you need to follow them. And that's what he did, and he's a great role model, and that's a critical part. Demonstrate your leader presence. It's not just your convictions, it's being a role model at all times. I think Oprah really exemplifies that really well, all the different areas, showing her purpose, demonstrating her values, demonstrating integrity, fighting for it, being trustworthy. All of these are leader presence issues, and figuring it out and exuding enthusiasm for what she does. But she doesn't just give a talk, she walks the talk. She is true to herself as far as we know, and I think that's critical to it. And finally, you want to get to the last stage, where what you really want to do is deal with the issue of continuity and sustainability. Susan Lyne, who's the former CEO of Martha Stewart, I think said what a lot of CEOs say very well: I hire people who I think have the potential to take my job at some point. In other words, we're constantly trying to hire people who are better than we are at what we do, so they can take the job that we're providing and move it to the next level. And that's a great way of inspiring the kind of people to look for. And so when people are hiring at the next level, I keep saying, we're to your capability. As a leader, are you willing to cultivate them? Those who are vulnerable and open up the door to do, find great next-gen leaders right under them. Those who don't are stifling and limiting the growth of the company. So you have to empower people. What you need to do is create the kind of organizational structure, systems, technology, team building, values and rewards, and the culture that's going to make the difference, so that the strategy for the company can be exercised well and allows top management only to move the company forward, but transfer the baton to the other group so that other people can take over and do it. So a good conductor, in many ways, is what a leader has to be. Getting everyone to work at the virtuoso performances, but as a team, so that they can create a mellifluous sound, a great concert that we'd want to hear. And to do it, you need great accountability systems. You need to be able to see what works. And so the recommendation of great leaders is you build decision dashboards that tell you what you're doing and why it's working. And you know that you're only looking at indicators that share what you're doing and where it's going to take you. Use objective feedback. You involve relevant stakeholders. It's not just a limited yes group of people who work for you, it's the entire organization. You process issues carefrontationally. This is a beautiful phrase I picked up at Vistage, because it's what we do in our issue processing, where leaders share with other leaders and get their expertise. So in a group where you get hundreds of years of different experiences that leaders have, and only to share with one another to solve problems, to confront issues, and solve problems in new ways. And then develop adjustment plans once you've decided what to do. The issue processing is something I do with my CEOs and my trusted advisors all the time, and it's remarkable how much they've been able to grow their companies, save problems by doing it correctly. And then when you've got a team and you're working with them, you need to make sure that you are aligning them. You're keeping them all focused, and that you're constantly bringing in people who can continue on that pyramid and take you to where you're going, and build that sense of community, because these are the sustaining values, the culture. Remember, culture eats strategy for breakfast, so it's so critical that you're bringing in people who want to work together, who like to work together, and who are able to do it. Which means, and we'll talk about this again next week, when people are introducing innovation, by definition it's disrupting something. And so what you need to do is you need to allow that dissent, but respect it in a way that it's going to encourage the company to go to the next level. So you want to avoid conformity and be sensitive to cultural diversity, and then adapt the energy that it provides where you can make a difference and do what you need to do. So if I put it all together, you get these 5 key attributes that I think are critical for every leader and for the next-gen leaders to have. A clarity of purpose, communicating constantly, excellently, so everyone really gets it, and there are no gaps. Commit to your theme and get everyone to follow through on the theme, whichever one is the one that you're working on right now, because again, it changes over time. You always want to be authentic and humble so that you have the courage of your convictions and you're demonstrating your leader presence. And finally, focus on the long haul so that it can define your company as great. Jim Collins and all the people who do studies on companies that are great, not just for a year or two, but over 5 years or 10 years or 15 or 20 years, focus on great companies are those who are able to continue and sustain those attributes. So now that you know it, it's your job to now do something about it. You've got to start getting ready now to cultivate this next generation of leaders. And how do we do that? Well, first is you need to engage them in deliberate practice. It's absolutely critical. Find the people in your organizations by using the different kind of measures and that you have to be able to measure what they can do and say these people have the capabilities to do them. Fast track them so what they can do is become early on leaders. Put them in leadership situations to see how they handle them and give them feedback. Don't expect them to be perfect the first time around. They will learn it. Use leader development simulations and give constructive feedback because people need to learn from it. One of the things I remind my students all the time is that when we spend a lot of time in MBA programs teaching case histories how to do things right so that people can do it. Some of the best programs, Northwestern is one that has it, they study companies that have failed, how they did things wrong. So how could Walmart make a great intrusion this many years into the economic world in India and then pull did in the next decision? Those are the things that you want your next generation to learn. So as we see that, as my system is regenerating, so what we need to do is take that second generation and really focus on what I'm going to call agility. Agility is the ability to respond to the shifting priorities. Remember, current leaders have said that their biggest problem is being able to deal with a complex world. And what they need to be able to do in this complex world is sorry. My Outlook is violating it. What they need to do in this complex world is learn how to change with the macro and the micro conditions. They need to focus on what impacts on an organization, and not just the organization, but think about the 5 forces that Porter talks about that affect the company. What affects its organization in terms of the suppliers, the potential entrance into the industry where it's going to move forward, and it's going to affect the company. So it deals with investors, it's dealing with customers, it's dealing with suppliers. Those are the issues that every leader has to follow, all of those different constituencies, and have to move forward as they're working with them. What you need to do, therefore, is put them in those circumstances where they can see the complexity, where they realize they need to make these changes, and that are very, very challenging and are going to affect what they do. And by putting them in a situation, what you want to do is measure, to some extent, their ability to have what's called informational awareness, the ability to take a look at the information that's external and accurately and quickly be able to make decisions on what to do and to move it forward. You also need to see if they know the importance of having within their network of groups whether they're going to have within their network of groups an effective decision-making architecture, in other words, the ability to process information within the group. This is the critical part. When you take a look at, as I mentioned to you before, some of the new organizational structures, like the network model that Al-Qaeda is doing, think about how decision-making is being spread around and being used. I'm really sorry. is being used to communicate around the world. You have leaders that are literally hiding in bunkers, in mountains, and getting the word across through their way of doing it. That is a new decision-making model, how they communicate that. They are always communicating. And finally, internally, how they communicate the information to all the people that they're doing and communicating to. What you also want to focus in on with these people is leadership IQ. And that's this ability to process the information quickly, to make good decisions, to implement those decisions effectively, and most important, to evaluate each episode and use the results to make a next step even better. That's what leadership IQ is. There are measures, again, you can use, and instruments you can use that are going to help people do that. And I highly recommend, as you're looking with the next generation, not only testing them on the field, but getting measures to help them improve their own areas of how to make good decisions, how to communicate them, and how to do them. For years, through presentation excellence, I've worked with leaders in helping them communicate more effectively with their teams and with clients and with investors. Has been a critical part of what we've done. And it's been interesting to watch how they now have to take this kind of presentation model and recognize it's really a leadership model, always has been, but they haven't done it. Let me give you a final thought that puts this together, and that is that a leader must have the courage to lead, has to have the patience to consult, and has to have the wisdom to know when the time is right for each. And that's really the critical issue. We really do live today more than ever in the fourth dimension, being able to change time, because the virtual world is moving us that way. So we need to know, when do we have to lead, when can we take some time to consult, and when can we take some time just to think and get the experience to know what's right and wrong, and we have to put it together. And the right answer to understanding how to cultivate the next generation is to really understand that you do that most effectively by cultivating these 5 attributes in yourself. It's one of the reasons that I chose to work with Vistage, because I have the privilege of working with lots of leaders who are trying to focus on how to do this themselves, become the best leaders they can, and cultivate the best leaders they have in their organization. And with that, I want to thank you for attending today's presentation. I'm sorry that the slides all jammed on 21, and I apologize for that. Now I'm going to try to take some of your questions. Question is, will a recording of the webinar be available? We're not sure. We're going to be adding on copies of this presentation, the webinar. We've recorded them in the past. We probably are recording them as we speak right now. But whether we're going to pass them on is a decision we haven't made. We will be doing them again, though, because we've had a lot of requests to do that, because October was a busy month for people in the spring, so we'll do that. You want to maybe stay tuned to your emails in the Presentation Excellence newsletter, letting you know when we'll redo them. We will offer people copies of the slides if that helps them to remember what we've spoken about, etc. I want to remind you that next week we're going to be doing a presentation on innovation. It's a little bit interactive in the beginning, so I'm going to probably switch to a different computer, so whatever stops this computer from working won't be in our way. It's called Leading the Innovative Organization, Unleashing and Guiding Creativity. It really stems on a lot of work that I've done with organizations to get the best input from workers, investors, crowdsourcing, etc., and adapt it to your company so that you're open-minded to new ideas and use innovation to catapult you to the next level. How do you do that, and how do you do that effectively? And finally, we're involved here at Presentation Excellence Group with a new organization called Mentor Our Kids, focusing on trying to improve the quality and quantity of student mentoring opportunities for people. And what we're trying to do is help companies that have committed already to providing internships in that capability, who haven't start. Our goal is to reach 1 million students per year through a much more high-quality, high-quantity program that Mentor Our Kids is all about. And you can see more about that on mentorourkids.org. And if you're interested in tidbits on how to learn to do it, you can feel free to give us a call, and we'll be able to help you. And with that, I want to thank you. Somebody said you're losing audio. I hope you've been catching it up till now. Everyone's had no problem. Thank you for letting me know. And again, if you have questions or answers that you want to pose, feel free to send them to me You can send them to me at jerrycon@presentationexcellencegroup.com or jerry.con@vistagenewyorkwrittenOut.com or any of the other emails. I highly recommend if you're interested in our blog. We focus on lots of very interesting issues. We've been released so we can show it to you. You can learn about commanding strategies. We don't believe management should ever go to a retreat. They should advance, and we treat those off-sites that way. Evaluate to win using an accountability system that now Jack Welch is involved with, and some of the other groups. We have a blog that we put on maybe 4 to 8 postings per month on a wide variety. Please join our community on that and share with us your ideas. And so I want to thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time and continuing with many of you the conversation. Have a great day.